All right, I'm Nicolette, and today we are going to talk about a harsh reality, the reality that moms go through things too. And sometimes these are terrible things. And even though they're going through them, they still need to show up for their children while navigating those feelings. And I'm joined today by Susan Hannifin-MacNab. She's the founder of A to Z Healing Toolbox. She's the author of the A to Z Healing Toolbox, a practical guide for navigating grief and trauma with intention. And by the way, that's used by mental health practitioners and bereaved communities worldwide. And she's also the programs and education manager for Soaring Spirits International, a nonprofit organization that supports the global widowed community. I don't think she does enough. I'm sure she's on to something else right now. But her work allows her to use her experience as a widow to help others in times of crisis, hardship, or challenge alongside mental health practitioners. And in my opinion, while all of that is impressive, I think one of the bravest things she's had to do is navigate her own grief and trauma while still being there for her child. So thank you, Susan, for joining us today. I'm really, really so appreciative that you're here to share your story.
Well, thanks for having me, Nicolette. It's good to be here, and I love sharing my story because I think it helps others.
Absolutely. So if you could, why don't you kick us off by walking us through the beginning of this journey and maybe touching on that event that sparked all of this great work that you're doing. I think that would be great for the audience.
Yes. So I was a mom and a wife. I married a professor of international business, and that took us to some really cool places, Hawaii, Canada, and Australia. So we had this kind of jet-setting international life. Our son, Jacob, was born in Australia. And when he was about 4, we decided we would love to get back to the U.S. mainland where our families live. And so all of our stuff was on a container ship coming across the ocean from Australia to California. And we were here for about a month. Jacob had just turned 5. And Brent went out for a drive in the local mountains here. He's not from this area of San Diego. He's not from San Diego at all. So he went out to just check out things as he does. Lots of guys like to drive, and he loved to drive. So he just went for a drive in the local mountains, and then he didn't show up for dinner, and he didn't show up for breakfast. So without taking you into the trauma and the drama of things, for 2 weeks, he was missing. And then I got a knock on the door 2 weeks later telling me that they found that actually a nature photographer was out in this beautiful mountainous area in the local mountains, and they found the car and his body in the ravine. So I suddenly became a widowed person and a solo parent to a 5-year-old. And not only did I have immense, what I thought was just grief because, oh my gosh, my person has died, but I didn't realize there was so much trauma embedded in that 2-week experience of someone being missing in action. So there I was suddenly with myself traumatized and grieving, and all the different emotions that go on with someone missing, anxiety, fear, hope, all of these different things. And then, oh, by the way, now I have a 5-year-old here who's in the middle of this tragedy as well.
So, I mean, what was that like? You still had to raise a child, I mean, how did that go on? And actually, during that 2 weeks, were you able to kind of give Jacob the attention? I'm thinking in my head, okay, so when I'm going through something, anything, whatever, I'm stressed about something, it's hard for me to play with my son, to really be there, present in the moment, to really, and so I'm thinking about that 2 weeks and how that was that different than after, when you had that unfortunate closure, but you had some sort of closure as to what had happened.
Right. It's a great question. And I get asked that a lot. Like, what did you tell your son, or how did that go down? And the truth is, I was an educator, a teacher of children, kindergarten through grade 12, before I was a social worker. So I knew internally that kids need structure and they need as much sanity as possible in their lives. So while Brent was missing, I didn't say to Jacob, well, Dad's missing and we don't know where he is. I mean, that is not something that a 5-year-old can wrap their brain around, or even an adult can wrap their brain around. So fortunately, because Brent was a professor of international business, we were traveling a lot. And sometimes Jacob and I were in the US and Brent was in Australia. I mean, we were kind of, passing sometimes country to country. So Jacob was used to, oh, dad's at work, dad's in Australia, dad's in Canada, dad's traveling, dad's in Japan. And so I said to him, until I knew what was happening, I said to myself, he's going to think that Dad is traveling.
Right.
And for all I knew, Dad was. I mean, like, where was he? I have he's somewhere, right? So he's traveling somewhere. And so I just knew that Jacob needed security and stability. So fortunately, again, my parents live 5 miles from us. And we, at that time, moved in and we were spending time with Meme and Papa. And so my parents provided also a huge amount of safety and structure for Jacob. It was summertime when Brent died, and Jacob was in a camp at a local church. It was like a Bible camp. Mm-hmm. So I sent him there every day for that structure. I mean, I kept his schedule as normal as possible, which is crazy to think that anything could be normal in a time like that. Mm-hmm. But because I can be a good actress when I need to be, and because I knew that this child needed safety and security and normalcy, there was no way I was going to pull him into what was actually happening in my world.
I can't believe I didn't even think of this before, but you brought up something. So last year, my husband had an accident, and he ended up in the burn unit in ICU for about 2 weeks. And my son was, he's 7, so he was 6, and around the same age. And I realized, looking back, my parents also provided that stability B, I wasn't even thinking about that. The real reason I wanted their help was because I just couldn't deal. I needed to be at the hospital every day. And I was, and then when he came home, there was a lot of work that I had to do. I mean, he couldn't even use his hands for weeks. He couldn't get up on his own. It was a really traumatizing environment for my son, but he wanted to see Daddy so bad that there were all these questions. Do I let him see him like that? Do I not? And, at one point, because things were so stable at my parents', my son didn't want to come home anymore. And he started just crying. I want to sleep here. I want to sleep. He calls my mother Bog for some reason. I want to sleep at Bog's. I want to sleep at Bog's. I'm not coming home. And it was just really tough. But, looking back, nothing changed there. Like, it was summer. Yes. He was still going in the pool. Like, Bog was still feeding him. They were still doing things. Papa was still, like, everything was the same there. But at home, things had changed so much. And I think that was a moment for me while you were speaking that I kind of maybe understood why he didn't want to come home. I thought I was doing so. I was like, how am I supposed to do both? I'm here being a nurse. I can't play with you. Like, he can't even go to the bathroom, like, what am I supposed to do? Thank you for that.
And I think, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that with your family. But, kids, what I know about children is that they're the barometers for what is going on. They pick up the moods, the feelings, the situation, and they may or may not outwardly behave in such a way that we think they're affected. And people say kids are resilient, and they are, but they're still affected. So it sounds like your son, and what I was doing for my son, was giving them that stability. And your son was actually verbalizing that, listen, I'm going to hang out over here where things are calm. So super smart for him to actually, voice that and then get that, because that's what he needed at the time, and I think that, that my son, he wasn't in school, but he was at a camp, and we had just recently moved here, and he loves, kids love their grandparents for the most part. So that's the good stuff. I'd say, part of my strategy once I did find out that Brent had died was to bring on board anybody and everybody who could possibly help us.
Right.
And first it was help him, because I didn't care about myself anymore. I couldn't see a reason for continuing this life at all. I had been married for 17 years. I'd been with Brent forever, traversing the world and creating a life. So what was the point anymore?
Right.
However, I have a 5-year-old. So that became the point. He became the point. And then where I am now, really, and with the book and all the work I do in the widowed community for widows that have children and who don't, is really because of Jacob. Like, I knew I needed to survive for him. And I started running after resources in my local community to help him. So, hey, let's get child therapists on board to help him.
Right.
Let's figure out therapy dogs to help him. Let's do all these things to help the child. But meanwhile, I was helping myself as well.
Do you think that, and I'm asking seriously because I really just don't know the answer. Do you think that at that time, and I'm wondering even for myself, like, did my son want me alone? Like, did he just want me to feel safe and he wasn't getting that? Like, what was that time alone with Jacob like in those beginning stages?
For me, I was on autopilot. I can't even remember the first year at all. I mean, I remember bits and pieces, but I remember I come from a military family. So I have a grandfather, a father, and a brother who are, they've been in wars. They are fighter pilots. They are submariners. They are people who you get up and you move and you figure it out. And so that warrior mentality infused in me. And then I really had to pull it out. I didn't even know I had that. But I was on autopilot. I got Jacob breakfast. I got him dressed. I look back now at notes. I was writing little sticky notes and putting them in his lunchbox. How in the world did I even think to do that during that first year? But it was so autopilot. This is what a kid needs. I used to be a teacher. I'm going to do this for him. The notes came. I had girlfriends writing notes, drawing pictures. We would put stuff in his lunchbox every day for school.
What is the theory behind that? Because I actually did that when my son went back to school because he was having some severe anxiety after the accident. And so I would leave him notes for lunch to think that, to let him know. And sometimes I would put a picture in there, like a real photo. And then he would go forward to those, and so, but I don't know why I did it. So I was wondering why is that what they need?
As you're sitting here thinking, I'm thinking of all the many children's books I have, and I have to, this is why. This book is called The Invisible String. And it talks about the invisible string that is constantly connecting people, mothers and children, wives and husbands, parents and grandchildren. So I think it's the invisible string that we want our kids to know that even though they're at school, there's a string connected and it will always be. And if they can have a reminder, a photo, a picture, a note for that 5 hours they're at school, they know that string is there. And so I think innately, right, as moms, we do these things because we care about our child or our children, but there is psychology behind it as well. So smart one.
Look at that. Jeez. All right. So let me ask you, I mean, I feel mom guilt on any given day. Right. So I'm sure that you've had to feel some sort of guilt as you were navigating your own feelings. And I don't want to speak for you, but I can only imagine what that must have been like. Did you feel those guilty feelings, and how did you cope with that as you were going through them?
That's a great question. I don't know that I ever thought of guilt. I was livid at Brent. Like, if anybody should have been guilty, it should have been him.
I like that.
Oh man, I talk to him all the time. Are you kidding me? You should be here. You should be driving your kid to crew practice or soccer practice or baseball practice or whatever. Like, not me. So yeah, I get mad at him all the time still. It doesn't change just because he's dead. It's like, I'm still mad at you. So, but the guilt, yeah, I never had that. And I had a girlfriend. One of the things I did was surround myself with other young widowed people through an organization called Soaring Spirits International. And this is the organization now I work for as the programs and education manager. But Soaring Spirits International is really a nonprofit that supports the global widowed community. And so I have friends all over the world who are on the younger side of being widowed. Some of us still have children at home. Some of us don't. Some of us chose not to have children. Some of us were engaged. I mean, if you lost the person you were supposed to spend the rest of your life with, we consider you a widowed person. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I surrounded myself with all of these widowed people. And a girlfriend said to me once, she was 4 years ahead of me in this process. Her husband died of cancer. She had a 5-year-old son at home, and now she was a solo mom raising a young boy. And she said to me, Susan, what I have learned is this: I am doing the best with the situation I have been given. And that has been my mantra for the last 9 years. I am doing the best I can with the situation I've been given. Your situation, you were doing the best you can with the situation you were given. Any tough situation, I believe that we as moms do the best we can with the situation that we have been given. So for me, there wasn't any guilt because I was doing the best that I could. And this was a crazy situation that I had never been in. And I had enough people saying to me, you're doing an amazing job. Right. Just keep doing whatever you're doing. Right. And that was enough to take any guilty feelings off the table. Right.
You had acceptance, it seems. It was like you had acceptance of the situation, so you didn't have to kind of look at it from, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. That was great.
Right. I mean, it was a horrendous situation I could never have imagined. I mean, I only heard these stories that happened over there to somebody else. Right. And now I was living it. So how could I possibly understand or even, like, for me, feel guilty about it? Wasn't my fault the accident happened. Thank God Jacob wasn't in the car also. I mean, on and on and on. Yeah. So for me, it was more about how do I manage my feelings, my devastation, my anger, all the emotions that come along with grief and the physiology of trauma. So you get those two together. I'm falling apart. How do I make sure my son has a normal childhood? I mean, what? Like, that was the huge question for me.
No, you just brought up feelings, and you do have a background working with children. So my question then is, what is the right answer? Is there a right answer? What is the right answer when it comes to how we talk about feelings with our child? And do we hide them to protect them? Or are we honest? I mean, is there a middle ground? How does that work?
I think there's no right answer. I always say to people, meet children where they are. If they're 5, you don't need to talk to them like a teenager. They won't understand that. If they're a teenager, you don't need to talk to them like they're 5 because they're going to think you're an idiot and they understand more about the world. So I have a teenager now, right? If this happened now, it would be a very different story while Jacob is 14 versus when he was 5. So when he was 5, I was able to put him with his grandparents, take off, do my own therapy, have my separate world, and then come back to him and do the mom thing the best that I could. So I really think it depends on the situation, the parent-child relationship, and many factors. One strategy that I read about and I started enacting in my own life was the strategy of compartmentalization. So when I knew I was absolutely going to lose it, and that would happen daily, I felt like, can I hold it together until he goes to school?
Right.
And then I can completely fall apart and do what I need to do. So I started doing that. Okay, we got half an hour in the morning, breakfast, get dressed. Sometimes I would be crying as I was making him breakfast, but I wouldn't completely scream, yell, cry, pound the pillows, and scare him. That happened when he went to... What's
Did he
that?
ever ask you why you're crying?
Oh, yes. I was very honest with him in that, I'm very sad. Daddy died. And then we had lots of books that were sent to us about what is death to a 5-year-old? Right. What does that look? How can you explain that? Right. And there's some great books that I read and my friends read to him time and time again. And one is called Lifetimes, A Beautiful Way to Explain Death to Children. And it talks about animals, like for a moth and for a dog and for a cat, they have a lifetime and a lifespan. And this is naturally what happens. And it's just very matter of fact. And then the last couple pages are, and the same is true with people. People have a lifespan. Sometimes it's 80 years old. Sometimes it's 70 years old. And most of the time people live a long time. But sometimes if there's an accident or someone gets very sick, their body dies. And so these kinds of books can really help fill in the gaps where parents can't think of what to say. It's written down, and then there can be a discussion afterwards. So that was one avenue I took.
You're gonna make me cry. I'm thinking.
Yeah, this life is not. I mean, I was 41 until my life fell apart, and now I'm 51, and I feel like I have it together. And I'm a different person completely, but I can sit with pain. I'm really good at sitting with pain and trauma and tragedy now because these are the people I help, and that was my experience.
Oh, it drives me crazy because, my son asks about death a lot, actually. And I don't want him to worry, so like you're talking about that book, most of the time people live a long time, and I tell him, Mommy's going to live so long, you're going to want to get rid of me, but I don't know that, and that's what's so hard. But I don't know if that's true. I could go outside and get hit by a bus. I don't know. And I just say it so matter-of-factly so that he doesn't have anything to worry about, because he'll worry and he'll become so consumed. So I'm like, all right, you got to work with me here, because I just told him I'm living to 110. So I need a little help here, and I just like, where is I mean, and I think back to when I was a child and I worried a lot about people dying as well. And I think about what my parents told me, and now I'm like, wow, they really just made shit up. They didn't know what they were saying. They just, they were just like, yeah, no, you don't got anything to worry about. Like, what the hell? Like, we just lie. I'm lying, but but he's 7. So what am I supposed to do? Tell him, yeah, anybody could die at any given moment? You can't do that.
There's a fine line, and I think, so for me, I mean, our situation was different because someone did die.
Right.
Like, this was our reality. So I couldn't say to Jacob, oh, don't worry, I'll be around till I'm 105. Right. We don't know that. And he knows that that's not true.
Exactly.
So what I did with him was, I just had to get really real, and the books really helped. We also have he's being raised in a church environment where we believe in heaven.
Right.
So we believe that we will see dad again, and that dad actually, he's not here physically, but spiritually, he knows what's up. Like he's around. And so look out. No. But I also, he, for a long time after Brent died, he would ask, so if dad was alive, he would be here, like on the couch, right? I mean, 5-year-olds little kids don't really understand the permanency of death.
Right.
So I would say, yes. And well, when are you going to die, Mom? Well, when am I going to die? Like, just curiously, as children are, like, when are we going to die? And so my answer was, we don't know. When it's our time to go, when God, when our time's up, right? Like we're going to go home to God, home to heaven, home with dad, home with all of our grandparents, all of that. So that's how I came at it. And then it was even more real. Well, Mom, if you die, where will I live?
Right. Oh, God.
And then it was the reality of, well, here's the plan. Because I have a plan, believe me, it's like, you will go live with Meme and Papa, 5 miles down the street, and you already have a room at their house, and you have all the same friends, and everything will be the same, but you'll be living with Meme and Papa. And I'll be watching over you just like dad. And so, he has, over the years, 9 years now, kind of internalized these things. And he's a very deeply spiritual 14-year-old, rightly so, because he has a parent who is watching over him and accessible, from another place and space. But to your question, I think it just depends somewhat on the situation, the parent-child relationship, and how old the child is, really.
Right. Oh, gosh. Susan, I don't know why this is hurting my heart so much today.
It's tough stuff. I mean, it's tough stuff. And I talk about it now. It is my story. And I talk with others about this stuff all day long because they're in these stories as well. So for me, it's kind of like, well, this is just what I do. Right. But for people that don't talk about bereavement and death and dying and rebuilding after the death of someone they love, it's tough. I mean, it's tough in both angles, really. But I'm used to it now, so it's just what I do.
Well, you're a pretty kick-ass. So,
well, thank you. I'll have to make sure my 14-year-old agrees with that now.
You probably won't for a few more years, right?
That's right.
Well, my 7-year-old thinks he's 14, but today I just told him, I'm not your bro. I never thought I had to say that out loud. I didn't think I had to say that, but apparently I do. So, as you leave us off, I was going to ask you first of all, to give us some advice for mothers who are dealing with their own grief. And this can be anything, right? I mean, it doesn't always have to be someone, tragically passing. There are other forms of grief. And it's important to note, in my opinion, that just because it's not the absolute worst, like what happened to you, doesn't mean that your grief isn't also grief and trauma, It's so important. But as you look back, what lessons did you learn, and what would you say to those moms today?
Boy, I've learned so much. I've learned that the most unlikely people will be there for you. I've learned that sometimes the people you expect to be there just can't for whatever reason. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe they don't understand. Maybe it's too scary for them, or they don't know how to support you. I've learned that asking for help is very brave and courageous, and that people will come and help. I've learned to ask for help early. For instance, I really wanted some more men in my son's life. We had grandpa, but really I just moved back here from overseas, so I didn't have a huge community of men for my son to be with. And I really thought, gosh, it'd be great if you had a big brother, the big brother, big sister program. Oh yeah, we probably wouldn't qualify because we live in the suburbs and no one's, I just thought, well, that's not for us, until a social worker friend of mine said, actually, Susan, it is for you. So why don't you please apply? And so I did. And Jacob's been part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program since he was 10. So I wish that I would have asked about that resource earlier for him, because there are resources out there. And so another thing I've learned is that there's so many people to help. There's so many resources that can help. And that's why I put the A to Z Healing Toolbox together, because there are 26 categories of places and things and people and therapies that can help with all types of grief and trauma, not just the death of a loved one, but divorce, sexual assault, military. There's so many people and so many programs out there that can assist. So I guess the number one takeaway would be to ask for help.
Well, Susan, I really appreciate you coming today and speaking and making me cry, and speaking to the audience about navigating that grief and letting them know that there are options and there is help. It's really important. And if you could actually leave them with some information about you and what you're working on, maybe point them in the right direction there.
Sure. So I am, as I mentioned, I'm the Programs and Education Manager for Soaring Spirits International. We run virtual and in-person programs for the widowed community, any age, any sexual orientation, any marital status, any religion. If you lost the person that you wanted to spend the rest of your life with, we consider you widowed. So that website is soaringspirits.org. And they will be able to see all of the programs there that we run. And then the other half of me is A to Z Healing Toolbox. And I run virtual groups and in-person groups for grief and or trauma. Sometimes it's both together. Sometimes it's just grief. And then I do speaking like this or keynote presentations at conferences. But if they're looking for connection, they can find me and the book on A2Z healingtoolbox.com. The book is there. It's also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you can buy books. And then they can connect with me at Soaring Spirits as well, Susan at soaringspirits.org.
Thank you again, Susan. I appreciate your work.
You're so welcome.